Thinking. All right, so welcome everyone to a special edition of Brain Swap, where as you can see, we're not literally physically together. Evan is here via Skype.
Hello, everybody.
So everyone, let me know how well Evan is coming through or not. Whoops, sorry. Every time. Every time. And that didn't even do what
Super ads.
Super ads. All right, so let's just turn that off. All right, so here we are today to talk about an interesting aspect of cosplay or costume play, where we want to talk about the question of cosplaying characters whose values are perhaps so extreme that you would feel uncomfortable cosplaying that character, or uncomfortable with others even cosplaying that character. So, for example, a supervillain, somebody who's not just nasty, but somebody who is who just tortures people. Right? Is there a line to be crossed? I guess would be the big question. Evan, what do you think about that? Is there some sort of moral event horizon for villains?
Well, let's take a look at this. Are we limiting ourselves to anime, or would that be fiction, or the world at large?
That's a good question. You certainly see people cosplaying more than just anime characters and such. I think let's open it up for the purposes of discussion to kind of anyone.
Yeah, because I've seen things like Stargate and other sci-fi and fantasy, and of course video games at anime conventions, and the overlap of the fan base kind of makes it make sense. If we stay with fiction and not discussing historical reenactment, there are some historical figures who have been used in fictional films that I don't think I'd feel comfortable. I mean, personally, I wouldn't cosplay them, and I'd feel kind of uncomfortable if somebody, for example, was cosplaying, say, Hitler or Pol Pot, or some super villains from history.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the fundamental, the kind of the obvious villain where you're walking past Jewish people cosplaying Hitler. That's not cool.
It's like, even if you are cosplaying, even if it was a reenactment, it would be a very uncomfortable situation for me to observe it or to participate in it, unless everybody there was there with the intent of this is a reenactment.
Sure.
And with cosplay, usually there's folks who are there who know that the cosplay is going on and came just for that, but then there's people who pass by and just sort of get caught up in the moment and get to enjoy it. And that's a little bit different than somebody who's there just for that intent.
Exactly. And that's kind of why I wanted to address the question of cosplay, because you have both folks who know, you have a spectrum of people. Some folks who know what you're doing with the character, some folks who don't, some folks who know the character but don't know your intent with the character. So it's not just all people who are conscious of the act, if you will.
It's funny sometimes seeing people cosplay different characters in Italia because of some of the uniforms and all. At that, I haven't. If you know what it's about, then you can kind of jump into it. But not knowing, it's like, why are these people in uniform?
Right. Well, and Italia is one of the reasons that this comes up every so often. Is you do have folks walking around in German and Italian World War II uniforms in anime conventions, and it can look odd. I think that's sufficiently on kind of straddling the line where it's like people in military reenactments. It's like Civil War reenactments, things like that. Where you could be driving by that and thinking, why are they dressed up like that? But they're not cosplaying Hitler, they're cosplaying a German soldier, in this case a caricature of Germany itself. So I think it's not quite that extreme.
It's not nearly as extreme, yeah.
And simply cosplaying a German soldier is not necessarily necessarily implying a stance about Germany in World War II. It's kind of saying, these people existed, they were around, they had these uniforms, and so I'm wearing that uniform. In a sense, I'm celebrating that outfit, but I'm not necessarily celebrating the morals behind it, which I guess gets kind of to the question: is cosplaying a character, can it be perceived as an endorsement of the character? Certainly, some people seem to think so.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, if a person if a person cosplays a character that's very overt in their seductiveness, if they wear a very revealing costume, is that an avocation of the values of the character?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Say, for example, Kill la Kill. That outfit is really provocative,
mm-hmm.
and to do it right, it reveals a lot. Even if you use natural skin color tights underneath the outfit, if a person likes the character but doesn't necessarily have the values of exposing that much of their body, how would they deal with the discrepancy between their personal values and the character's values that they're representing?
In fact, Dee Roberts in the chat room points out, she says, Dee points out, I know some people don't like when girls cosplay a scantily clad character and feel like it's gratuity for the sake of gratuity. And there's certainly an element to that where some of these characters' outfits were designed by the staff to be gratuitously revealing. So when people are cosplaying that character, it is, even though the cosplayer is just trying to mimic the outfit's purpose is to accentuate certain aspects of the female anatomy most of the time. So that can certainly get into that issue, like you were saying, where I think you can be cosplaying a character, and even though you don't intend to be problematic, just what you are wearing is problematic to people observing it.
And I can see at different anime conventions it could be more or less problematic. I think there's some conventions that have a more mature audience and some that are more family friendly. I think at a convention where it's mostly people who are newer to anime and don't realize some of the particular quirks and characters, something may be a little bit more tricky to represent without misconception, where when you get a very mature or very large anime convention audience or cosplay audience, they can accept a difference in between the person and the character that they're portraying. For example, Vincent Price played a lot of sort of macabre characters, but he was a really decent fellow on one-on-one. And so actors who have to play villains may not necessarily be villains in real life.
Sure.
But they are portraying them. But that's a clear just difference, where when you're cosplaying, it's not as clear that there's that separation. And I wonder why it wouldn't be as clear.
Yeah, well, part of it too is that as a cosplayer, you are presenting that character in public. You're not just doing it for a particular performance piece. You're going out in public, in the public of a convention, and showing that off, if you will, to a crowd. So it comes across differently than, it's kind of like handing out pamphlets on the street. It implies a certain more broad interest in getting that out there. Now, Dee also brings up in the chat room that some small communities in Asia dislike when Westerners, particularly females, cosplay Japanese anime characters because it somehow makes them, less cute or less whatever. And there's something to be said for the idea that this is a culture that is designed for Japanese consumption. That foreigners are coming in and taking part in. So there is a nationalistic aspect to that, not in a negative sense. I can kind of see where they're coming from on that. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, cosplay in the U.S., of course, has its own variations of ideas and values, just like anime in the U.S. has a sort of a different fans, otaku, everything has its own variety, its own sort of variation on the theme. So I can understand how somebody would say, "Hey, that's taking it out of context, and it's not adding to it in the same way." But part of that is the joy of cosplay. I mean, the fun of creating your costume, of recreating a character. I mean, people don't even have to have the same body type or sexuality or height or stature of the characters that they're portraying. That's part of the fun of a costume.
Yeah.
Is you're putting on the outfit of another, pretty much someone else's skin.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's one thing people get confused about. We're seeing some of that in the chat room too. Personally, I'm talking, and I think we're talking beyond the question of, do you have the right body type for that character? Personally, I don't care. Partly because Japanese girls cosplay male anime characters better than Japanese boys do. I've seen more Japanese girls cosplaying brilliantly. So yeah, you can be whatever gender, whatever you want. As long as you're trying to get something across. And that also gets to the whole question of intent. A good example there being the I'm forgetting the name of them, but there was for a while a group of like 40-year-old men who'd cosplay as the Sailor Scouts from Sailor Moon.
Yes.
And we're talking facial hair, unshaved legs, the whole 9 yards. They were not, they were not trying to look like teenage girls physically. And that was part of the joke, is that they were intentionally trying to be kind of something that you need brain bleach after seeing. So there's that side of it too, where sometimes you're cosplaying something comedically.
The humor and the irony of someone playing something that they're obviously not.
Yeah. Now, the other side of that coin is, or not the other side of the coin, but something else that's part of that is the question of, well, so let's get back to the whole idea. A good example would be, I'm forgetting the name of it right now, Momotaro's Divine Sea Warriors. So this is a 1945 anime film about Japanese soldiers who are fighting Americans in World War II. And by Japanese soldiers, they're actually cute, cuddly animals, but it's it's a kid's film. And that movie portrays them parachuting on at least Allied GI, clearly Caucasian drawn characters who immediately surrender, and it ends with characters literally stomping on a map of America. Imagine cosplaying as one of those characters. Like, what message is that?
That would be really tricky, because part of it I think would be the general lack of exposure to that film. People would not understand the direct relationship between the character and the show that is being portrayed. But yeah, that brings up a good question. I like how you brought the idea of handing out leaflets as being more similar to the style of experience for cosplay, in contrast to, say, the theater experience where everybody's there at the theater for that strict purpose. It's more of as people come and go, and they may or may not be there for the purpose, and so the perception of avocation of the character is going to be higher, and the less familiar the audience is with the character, the more that misconception that it's an avocation on the part of the wearer of the outfit, I think, is much higher.
And it's one of the cool things about cosplay. It's one of the cool things about cosplay is that there's a form of performance art in cosplay. It's kind of street theater in a very kind of low fidelity way, if you will, right? Where obviously you're not acting out something, you're not trying to be some provocative thing, make people blow their minds, but it is more akin to street theater or performance art than it is to a lot of other things.
And what's funny is seeing similar characters find each other, different characters from the same show or same characters, and performing impromptu sort of events, poses, or enacting their characters' responses, calling to each other, or the scene. That can be really exciting.
Right, and it's also why this becomes difficult to deal with. This whole question of what this, because cosplay isn't like anything else. It is some element of performance, while it is some element of fandom. It's complicated. And I think there's a range of characters you're in there, and there's a lot of things about kind of what are you doing when you are cosplaying? Like, what is the effect of your cosplay on other people?
This would be an interesting sociological study.
Yeah,
because the impact has so many different levels.
Right, and I can cosplay just because I like the costume, and there are plenty of cosplayers who just say, that looks cute, I'm going to wear that. I know nothing about the character. And there's certainly nothing about that. Liquidus points out in the chat room that you have these cosplay competitions where they mainly judge performance and how well the cosplay is. You may not know anything about the character. You may not have any interest in the character at all, just in, and certainly not in the character's values or their role in the show. Just what what you're seeing visually. It's an interesting kind of visual art, if you will, as opposed to anything else.
It's interesting seeing characters cosplay and appreciating the craftsmanship. Quite often, I'll see a character and I have no idea what show it's from, and I'll find a new show that I want to go and watch. So, in some sense, there is some promotion of the character merely by cosplay.
Right now, Desert Fox asks, does anyone truly agree with a character's values anyway? Like, is anyone cosplaying? Yeah, is anyone cosplaying Haruhi? Do they actually believe her ideas?
Well, I don't know. You guys are all time travelers, right?
Right.
Or espers. No, I often don't even agree with myself half the time. So agreeing with somebody else, I don't know.
Totally. Yeah, it's and that gets to an important element of this. There's the difference between intent and effect, right? So there's a difference between I go in as a character and I may not believe the character, I may not agree with the character's values, but when people observe me in that costume, are they going to make assumptions or beliefs about that character or my playing that character? It's a classic,
your values. Yeah.
Right. It's a classic question of what I say is less important than what the other person hears.
I think some of that can actually break down because of the different individual characters. Like, I don't know too many people who would say that the guy who cosplayed Jack Skellington
Mm.
is advocating Jack Skellington necessarily his values,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, I could see somebody cosplaying somebody from Star Trek, for example, because they like the values of the series Star Trek, sort of in a larger sense, the quest for new experiences and knowledge and a peaceful coexistence and interchange. Some of those values are really great values, and people have formed belief systems even around them and incorporated them into their lives. So it's hard to say for me over a large span of characters that it's any particular set of rules because it kind of breaks down from character to character.
Sure.
And I suppose that could even happen from cosplayer to cosplayer. Some cosplayers are just doing, the okay, I'm here to exhibit this outfit that my friends have helped me put together, versus I'm here as a fan and I put this together just to represent this character because I believe in this character.
Dee puts this really well. It's not always the values of the character, it's what the character stands for. I think it's a brilliant way of putting it. As an example, people probably aren't all about Superman and his views on women, or weighing lives and minimizing losses, or any number of things that Superman has done in the comics over the years, I'm sure. They just identify with the concept of being able to help and save anyone. I think it's a great way of putting it, Dee, is that there's this big difference between what the character necessarily values and how that character portrays it, behaves relative to those values. So yeah, I think it's a really good point.
Profound, yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, like to what you were saying earlier, the thing is, there are certainly cosplayers who just cosplay whatever. There are lots of different. There's a spectrum. The question is there a line that can be crossed? Is there a character that is so problematic that if someone were to cosplay them, it would probably be a good idea to walk over to them and say, I recommend you change out of that outfit. Like ew.
Or in the case of hentai, change into an outfit.
Well, that would be a great example. There are some really dark hentai out there, with some characters with really problematic, relationships to women, shall we say. So, if I were to cosplay, and I would not, a character from Legend of the Overfiend, or Tsukidoji, or some of these other things that just have really, really deeply problematic values. Like
some of the characters from Daughters of
right.
I'll probably butcher it.
Yeah.
That was hard to watch with a group of folks there.
Oh yeah.
And I'd hate to see somebody playing that just because they.
Yeah. No, that villain is a great example. I'm glad you brought that up. Because he's downright sadistic towards pretty much all the women in the show. So it's like, if you were to cosplay that, it's like, what message are you sending? Why are you, in a sense, celebrating or otherwise kind of bringing into public this character?
At the same time, I'd feel comfortable with somebody playing Boogie Pop and Boogie Pop Phantom, man. So, yeah, I wonder if it's the degree of fantasy versus degree of real potential. I don't know.
Right. And you don't have to cosplay. You don't have to cosplay that character or whatever. And it gets down to that thing that, yes, you may want to cosplay that character. Yeah, you may think the outfit is cool, but is there a point at which your desire, your like for that outfit is outweighed by the problematic aspects of more or less celebrating that character in public?
I think a lot of people's internal censor stops them from cosplaying things that may not be appropriate. But sometimes you see something and you wonder how, how did that how did they
Yeah.
how did they seem to think that this would be appropriate here?
Right. And I don't know if we actually have this as an eventual brain swap, but this is something that comes up occasionally. Is this question of, how young is it to be appropriate to be cosplaying, say, Kill la Kill, right? You have some outfits that are very provocative, and when a very young girl is playing that, again, or wearing that, again, is there some point at which that becomes a little too revealing and creepy? I'll reveal here, or I'll relate here, and I may have mentioned this in previous brain swaps. There's a story Crispin Freeman tells. I think I told you this before, Evan, where he was at, I think, his first con, and he describes, walking down the hallway, and a girl passes him. She is maybe 14, and she is cosplaying Rei Ayanami shower scene from Evangelion. So she is wearing, she's wearing blue and white striped panties and a towel around her neck and going down, over her breasts. That's it. And a blue bob wig. That is her entire costume. And she's just walking down the hallway like that. And as he describes it, one of those things you're like, she isn't where she is wearing that.
Wow. And just walking down the hallway. Ooh.
Right.
Did she have like bodyguards with her? Older brothers on each side.
Yeah, and no skin suit that he could tell. I mean, and obviously this was probably 2 decades ago, and cons were much more lax about this at the time. So it's just one of those things where that's the character, that was the outfit, and that's what she was wearing.
And as far as her age, I mean, that really, makes the character, but cosplay in areas that are not designated, hey, this is the stage, this is the cosplay pageant. It's nice to see that, but there are certain things that I think need to stay only on the stage for the presentation. And just walking down the hallway invites too many opportunities for things to go bad.
Well, and obviously,
just public misconceptions and there's if she was trying to recreate the character, I think that's admirable, but that's not the kind of thing that would be wise to kind of. I mean, a for recreation, but as far as location, I can't say that would be a.
And obviously, there are laws and hotel rules and con center rules about what you can and can't wear. Well, famously, at Dragon Con, I think about 15 years ago, a couple of girls cosplayed as victims on Law & Order SVU. So they wore police tape, and that was it.
Oh, my.
Yes, just strategic pieces of police tape. And con staff approached them and they said, there's nothing in the rules that says we can't wear this. It is essentially, it is covering as much as a small bikini would. And so the con eventually changed their rules to say, okay, there's a certain point at which you are using the concept of the character to show as much skin as possible, right? But it's like, there are victims like this in SVU, so.
I think most gals can tell when they're dressing in something to stimulate rather than recreate. And I think they were probably on the stimulate side rather than recreate side.
And that was pretty clear from the incident and how they behaved and so forth. It was they had worn shall we say minimal outfits before, so understandable. But again, this also works back into the fact that in anime fandom we have a lot of teenagers. We have a lot of young teenagers. We have a lot of people who aren't necessarily mature enough. They might be, but not
They
necessarily.
might not realize that there's a difference between the stimulate or recreate. And
Right.
then what they do to recreate may be very stimulating in a way that they don't expect that kind of attention.
Yeah. And
Which we also don't want to promote too much of the wrong kind of attention for the
right, and this gets into
the experience for other people also. So.
and this gets into the whole other, side of that problem that, we don't want to discourage people from wearing outfits just because men will ogle them, right? It's like,
right.
you can wear a skin tight outfit. That doesn't mean that men have the license to come up and chat you up. But like we said, and part of this is getting to the fact that there's a difference between that and wearing something that basically qualifies as public nudity, where you're kind of finding a way around laws against how much you can actually show. That becomes a problem.
Yeah. I remember seeing a promotional for a more adults-oriented convention.
Yes.
And something like that at a more adult-oriented convention. In fact, I think there was one that was strictly adults and probably had a lot of adult content. It would be more acceptable to have something revealing like that at that kind of environment because they're intending and they're preparing the environment for that kind of exposure. Where if it's a regular con, it's like all access ages for most places,
right?
Except for if you have a wristband. But if you're walking down the hall, that's all access area, every age.
And this is something kind of interesting too that I've learned recently, which is that there's a lot. Back in the early days of like science fiction conventions and fantasy conventions, there was actually a lot of nudity in the cosplay back then. So if you go back and you look at photographs of fantasy cosplay back in like the 60s and 70s when they were first doing sci-fi and fantasy conventions, you will find people wearing these very revealing outfits because back then when they were doing these cons, it was either a more adult audience or it was a more, shall we say, liberal audience. I mean that politically, but in the sense that if parents were taking kids to a con like that, they would explain to their kids, some people are not going to be completely dressed here. So that actually kind of was an aspect of conventions early on. And of course, folks who will cosplay kind of migrated from that over to Japan to create cosplay as we know it. It's kind of a more liberal decade in terms of nudity and all that kind of stuff, as Dee points out in the chat room. So that's I don't want to say that complicates it, but it's kind of interesting that we're kind of bouncing back and forth between that, where there's a lot of it there. It existed back in the day. Now we don't do it as much, but now we're kind of wrestling with that a little bit more.
And I think there's definitely an artistic level too that is important to point out. I mean, you look at statues, Greek statues.
Sure.
It's not. It's more of a celebration of the human body, but it's not always sort of the overt sexualness of it.
And also, that statue isn't a real person either. There's also the aspect of that's there's no real person that might become the object of attention as a result of that statue.
Big difference.
Now, Liquidus brings up in the chat room that you also have folks like Jessica Nagiri who will play sexualized versions of characters. So sexy Stormtrooper, sexy Pikachu, things like that.
Sexy Pikachu.
and that again, it kind of complicates it in the fact that you do have characters who are like, hey, let's cross these streams, if you will. And
I can appreciate some of those because it's an interesting twist. Mm-hmm. Somebody putting an interpretation on a existing character, kind of like fan fiction. Yeah. As long as it's not to the point where I'm thinking I need to get this person a towel and find some way of
Exactly, and they're adults, and they obviously know what they're doing, and also it's sexualized in the sense of sexy, not sexualized in the sense of pornographic, right?
Yeah.
It's not trying to suggest uh, a direct sexuality to the character as much as the attributes of sexiness.
Right.
That is certainly also a thing. But yeah, and so I think it is interesting. There are a lot of aspects to it. I think it's important also to think about this topic as you're at a convention. I think when you're walking around looking at staff or looking at cosplayers, I think it's helpful to think, okay, what is the line? If there's something that I think is crossing the line, at what point is that, just my perspective, and then at what point is that offending other people? Like, what do we decide kind of as a community? And it's certainly a tough one.
It's tricky because it's not always very clear. But if my internal alarm goes off saying, I feel like a perv looking at this person, then maybe.
Yeah. Well, and also we don't want our fandom to get to the point where folks from outside start writing articles about, do you see what they're doing at these anime conventions? We don't want an incident where folks are from the outside are looking in and saying, oh my gosh, they've crossed a line. Now, folks in the chat room are asking, do any of us ever cosplayed? I don't know if any of you in the chat room have done so. I have cosplayed in the past. I've cosplayed Seiji Mizushima from Whisper of the Heart. Is a very simple cosplay. It's slacks, a white shirt, and a violin. But also recently, I cosplayed as Char Aznable, so that was fun.
Quite impressive, Char.
Thank you. I have the complexion and the hair more or less for it, so that helps. And I gotta say, cosplaying as a recognizable character is a lot of fun. I had a lot of people come up to me and say, actually, what were some of the things? But they wanted to shake my hands. Well, yeah, basically, it was
from across the.
Yeah, it was Char. Can I? Actually, I had one guy come up and want to take a picture with me, but he had an Amuro T-shirt. And so I initially refused to take a picture with him. And yeah, that's fine. But people recognizing you as a character, it creates a bond around that character, which is a lot of fun.
I haven't cosplayed any characters yet. I'm still looking for a good cosplay character to portray, and also some friends to help me, since this would be my first time playing a character. So I'm open to suggestions for characters.
There we go. We'll have to come up with something. That'll be our next thing. I want to cosplay with multiple people who call out to each other from across hallways. Like set up little impromptu scenes throughout the con. I think that would be fun. Actually, with my hair, I would love to at some point cosplay Hiro Yui from Gundam Wing, and have a girl cosplaying as Relina, and just have us at various places in the con looking at each other going, Hiro, Relina. Which, if you've seen Gundam Wing, that this happens practically every episode. So it can be a lot of fun. And that, again, gets to this point that there's a reason there's all this cosplay. People really enjoy doing it, and it's addictive in the best way. So I think it's important to think about what the boundaries are and the point at which you are taking a character too far or choosing a character that might be offensive to other people. Let's be honest, that might happen.
I still want to get into an impromptu Haruhi dance.
Yeah, those have become distressingly infrequent. We'll have to start them again. We'll have to start doing that. Maybe we'll go as Kyon and Izuki from Haruhi. Be cool. All right, so I think we've covered this pretty well. We've been chugging along for an hour. So next week, we will be covering a rather different topic because we like to switch things up a little bit. Next week, we'll be going back to the topic of NEETs and hikikomori and ask about whether modern society is responsible for the creation of NEETs and hikikomori. Why are they out there? What's going on? We've asked if they exist in America. We've asked what we can do to help them. We're asking about the origins of them. Why are they there? And have modern conveniences created NEETs? We'll talk about that there. So thank you all very much for joining us. Appreciate it a lot. And we will see you all next week.
Thanks a lot. See you guys.